Good afternoon, and I welcome you back. This is the third in our series of the Wisdom of Plenty Coup, as he led the Crow Nation back from cultural devastation. We ended up last week, just as a reminder, where we were discussing Harvey Cox's proclamation that it may be wise for us to celebrate the Spirit of Jesus Christ rather than a dogmatic belief in Jesus Christ. That it would be beneficial for us to be open to this same radical hope as were the Crow. It is this radical hope that allowed the Crow to move forward after their cultural despair. And it may hopefully provide for us a way forward to flourish in a life that we may not yet completely understand. I want to make a comment here. Warren Gardner and his family had sent me, a picture of a coup stick here. And I've outlined it, and this is what a coup stick would look like. And as you can tell, it is not a weapon. It is a form of humiliation on an enemy, that when the enemy was touched by a coup stick, they were alive. They had not been killed. In fact, that was the courageous way to move forward for a Crow brave, was to touch the coup stick to a live enemy. And he reminded me, rather interestingly, if you remember the movie Little Big Man, when the cavalry is engaging the human beings, the Native Americans. And as the human being rides by on his horse and touches the cavalry member and then rides on, the cavalry member turns around, aims his rifle, and kills the human being. And it was noted in the film, good day for the cavalry, bad day for human beings. But I thank him for sharing that with us. I also want to, speaking of the concept that we've been discussing of a new way of being, a new way of living, a new way of celebrating, just this week we experienced a rather dramatic celebration, a new way of celebrating Easter. My sincere thanks and admiration for Terry, for Gretchen, Dorsey, Anita, Nancy, PJ, and everyone and anyone who had anything to do or contributed to the wonderful and wondrous journey we had on Easter Sunday. Thank you very much. That was extraordinary. So now we're going to look a little bit further into this concept of radical hope and what it means. And why is the hope of being able to survive after cultural devastation? And how is it like prayer? Both are directed to a future goodness that may transcend an individual's or an entire culture's current ability to even understand what this future goodness is. Both radical hope and prayer anticipate, look into the future for a good for which those who have the hope and yet may lack the appropriate concepts with which to understand how that hope or the prayer may be realized. And please understand, these are radical positions because they will be met with skepticism, with judgments of being gullible. They will be met with judgments of appeasement, of delusion. Plenty Coup himself was met with opposition by another great chief of the Sioux, or the Lakota, Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull impugned Plenty Coup's judgment and leadership. He believed him to be a coward for not fighting the white man until the last brave was dead. Christ was impugned for turning the other cheek, for hanging out with prostitutes or lepers. He was impugned because he was not the warrior king that everyone was expecting to free them. For both Plenty-Coup and Christ, and for anyone who proclaims themselves as Christian or prayerful, it could and probably should be argued that this hope of a future goodness based on faith, prayer, and in a spirit of an existence beyond our ability to understand it. All of these are acts of courage. The courage to trust and believe in the message that is received. And courage is a genuine virtue, possibly the greatest virtue, as proclaimed by Aristotle. Courage is a state of character whose exercise, if we exercise courage, then that contributes to living an excellent life. Without courage, it is virtually impossible to live an excellent and authentic life. So Plenty-Coup's courage is manifest in his fidelity to his prophetic dream. Despite the destruction of the Crow culture or their way of life, he never abandoned the idea that he had been given a vision that he derived from a spiritual world. Christians, as we have just experienced in this last week, were also thrown into a world they did not understand when Christ was crucified on the cross. How to maintain hope or a Christ-like life without Christ? What or how do we hold on to the precepts or concepts of living a Christ-like life when the living embodiment of that life no longer walks with us? Just as the Old Testament writings and Plenty-Coup's dream reveal to those who listened or heard the dream, we all would be facing an inevitable devastation. A devastation beyond our ability to understand it. But importantly, both Plenty-Coup and the Christians who were alive at the time of Christ's crucifixion were left with the belief and the message that they would indeed survive. Indeed, they would come out on the other side facing an ungraspable reality, but with new ways to live well. But this is a bit of diversion. It is not my goal to compare Plenty-Coup and Jesus Christ. This is truly way beyond my pay grade. What I am trying to explore is the vision each of them had that included an understanding of not only that cultural devastation would occur, but that they would be provided with an understanding of what tools would be necessary to carry the dreams, the prayers, and the radical hope forward to healing, to living courageously, to living without anxiety, or at least reduced anxiety. As people of faith and spirit, we reach out to a world that is truly well beyond our understanding. But we reach out with yearning, longing, admiration, and desire for that which we take to be valuable, that we take to be beautiful, and that we take to be good. For all the risks involved, we make an effort to live with others. On occasion, we aspire to intimacy. We try to understand the world. and on occasion we try to express ourselves and create something. We aim towards living a happy life. As finite creatures, it is a necessary aspect of our existence that our lives will be marked by risk, and they are marked by risk. The courage that comes from our beliefs or our prayers, our dreams, our meditation, provide the capacity for living well with the risks that inevitably attend our human existence. Lear writes that Pleniko's specific religious beliefs were important to him. They gave him the sustenance with which he could hold on to this core commitment through the storm. The four winds are a natural physical force that have overwhelming power. But their menacing existence does not and did not disturb the very fabric of the universe. The world is a place in which such a storm can occur. It is possible for humans to be overwhelmed by these storms, however they may appear, to fall into the depths of despair. Now may be one of those times as we experience COVID-19. However, the courage that emanates from belief, from prayer, hopes, dreams, they provide an ethic that the fundamental goodness of the world is secure. Hope, while not a plan or a strategy, is not just wishful optimism. Pleniko's dreams had a divine sanction, and the ability of the Crow people and their courage to hold on to its significance was a powerful act of courage and faith. There was and is a spiritual backing for the thought that new forms of living well, that new good forms of living will and would arise. Pleniko was able to draw upon the traditional icon of the chickadee. Through his dream vision, Pleniko was able to take a valued and an honored spiritual force and put it to creative use in facing up to new challenges. Thus, although Pleniko was advocating a new way of life for the Crow, he was drawing upon the past in vibrant ways through his vision quest, through his prayers, through his hopes. All of these were traditional Crow values. Not to live in the ways of the past, but to use these values of the past to find a way forward. His prayers have value, not necessarily to affirm the Crow present way of life, but to provide him with information, enigmatic as it was, of a way forward. How many times have we all prayed or wished or fought for our present way of life? How many times have we prayed, wished, and fought for our environment, our forests, or for a way of life of a bygone time? How many times have we been visited with answers only to misinterpret them, to interpret them in a way of life that is meaningful, but only for the present? Some have said this present time, this pandemic, is a reset button, that the planet Earth is taking a deep breath, that without our traditional ways of living our life in community, of sharing in communion, of sharing the sign of the peace, of sharing human touch, we have come to recognize that that which has previously separated us is a false border. That instead of thinking of some people as poor people, we think of them as people who are without resources, which of course can be provided. Or rather than homeless people, we think of them as people without a safe abode, which of course can be provided. Rather than thinking of mentally ill people, we think of people who suffer from mental illness that of course can be treated. That rather than separate us based upon skin color, to consider instead that we are a community of people with a rainbow of color, and certainly color cannot be intrinsically bad or immoral. I sincerely ask any of you to look in your box of 64 crayons and identify a single color as bad. That which separates us physically and spiritually is also a false border, whether that be between Christians and Muslims, Jews, agnostics, atheists, or between Ireland, Serbia, China, Croatia. These are false borders and nothing like a worldwide virus. And there is nothing like a worldwide virus to teach us this lesson. It is a possible parallel story to Coups and his dream. The gospel biographer Mark tells the story of Jesus in a boat with his disciples when a furious storm engulfs them. Panic-stricken, they rush to find Jesus in the back of the boat, resting on a cushion asleep. And they question his concern for them. But he asks, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no trust?" And I can imagine them saying, "Yeah, I got trust, but what about this storm? What about the water that's filling our boat? What about sinking our boat?" And I wonder how those of us who profess to have faith in Jesus, Abadate, Allah, Yahweh, Muhammad, would respond to this query. I wonder if instead of using our prayers as a form of security, that we are surely living our best lives, what if instead we, as Coups, were open to answers that might not be so comfortable to us? Might we be more open to respond to the real pain, despair, and cruelty around us, more compassionate to our fellow travelers whose lives are lived in desperation, more cognizant or responsive to an environment that cannot survive our continued degradation? Might we be more open to a message, rightfully or wrongfully, attributed recently to Bill Gates, when he said, "This virus that is oppressing us for a short time, might it give to all of us a better appreciation for those whose entire life is spent in oppression." And please, not for a moment am I saying that this pandemic is the will of God or an act of God to straighten us all out. This is not the flood, nor is the vaccine the ark. However each of us gets divine inspiration, whether through prayers, enigmatic dreams, cosmic messages from the trees, fly fishing, whatever, we must really listen to the message. Then we must be willing to share that message. We must have faith in the meaning of that message. And finally, we must be amenable to an interpretation of that message by our elders. But then, after vigorously examining the message, we, as Coups and the Crow Nation did, we must act. If we want the act of morality to bend toward a more just world, then people of faith and morality and conscience must each act to be arc benders. Our true work here is not our jobs or our professions. That is what we do, but probably not what we were created to do. Our really true work is to look after each other, to protect each other and our island home, and to be of benefit to one another. I want to share with you something I read recently. It's a message that embodies our thinking in maybe a light-hearted way, that our present way of being is not the only way of being. So this is a married couple who went on a 3-month bike tour together every night, setting up camp, putting out their sleeping bags, securing the area, climbing into bed, then getting up in the morning. And if any of you have done this, putting your clothes on, lying down on your in your tent, on your sleeping bag. And after 3 months of this, every single day, and finally they get home, and one morning, as they're struggling to put on their clothes, lying down in bed, they look at each other and begin to laugh. And one of them says to the other, "We don't have to do it this way. We have room to stand up in our bedroom and put on our clothes." The writer of this story, one of the two, recalls that it was a close and tender moment. And I know neither of us would have made it so well without realizing that our world had changed. We would not have made it so well without the other's help, without someone to lean on. Compassion, recognizing the pain and the need in another, is a way of life that is compatible with all faith traditions, with non-believers, with skeptics, with any way of life that truly values our fellow sentient beings and non-sentient inhabitants of this earth. I need each of you to help me balance while I try to live my life. We need each other to help us balance so that we can live authentic lives with meaning and flourish in those lives. Remember, at this time of anxiety and turmoil, how fast things pass by and are gone, those that are now and those that are yet to come. As Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations, existence flows past us like a river. The what of existence is a constant flux. The why of existence has 1,000 variations. Nothing is stable, not even what's right here. The infinity of the past and the future gapes before us, a chasm whose depths we cannot see. It was that chasm that Plenikoux could not envision. That chasm was far too deep for him to even begin to fathom its meaning. And yet, on that mountain, bleeding from a severed finger, famished and without sleep, he received a vision that would heal his people, a vision that would guide his people forward to a new way of living a meaningful life, a vision that would raise his people's heart from the ground so that they could do the sun dance again with meaning. They could sing again. I hope that after this virus has completed its run through humanity, we will not just return to our old way of life, as much as we yearn for the known. I hope instead that we confront the truth that our civilization is often unjust, unloving, and unsustainable, that we have an economic crisis of obscenely increasing economic inequality. We have a socio-political crisis of racial, ethnic, class discrimination, and we have a spiritual crisis that erodes the moral foundation of our necessary belief systems. I hope that as Plenty-Coup did, we will all open our hearts and our minds and be able to receive a message that has been present since eternity. That through our mindfulness, meditation, and prayers, our openness to these practices, and our recent experience of being out of physical communion with each other, we gain a more perfect realization of the compassion that each of us needs, and that we act on that compassion, that we truly understand that we all need someone to lean on. A compassion that will allow all of humanity to lift up our collective hearts, to spiritually and physically heal us. And in closing, I would like to share a poem that has been circulating on the internet by Catherine O'Meara. And people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played and learned new ways of being and stopped and listened deeper. Someone meditated, someone prayed, someone danced, someone met their shadow, and people began to think differently, and people healed. And in the absence of people who lived in ignorant ways, dangerous, meaningless, and heartless, even the earth began to heal. And when the danger ended and people found each other, they grieved for the dead people, and they made new choices and dreamed new visions and created new ways of life and healed the earth completely, just as they were healed themselves. There is a general consensus that with this healing of our earth, our bodies, and our souls, then and only then can we begin to live meaningful and loving lives in communion with each other, and in the mystery and the awe and the splendor and wonder of this shared created world. Let all of us live with the wisdom of the chickadee. I want to thank you all for listening to these 3 parts of the sessions. I also want to thank Gretchen and Terry for giving me the opportunity to share the wisdom of Plenty-Coup, the last of the great Crow chiefs. This is the last of the formal sessions, but if there are questions or comments or thoughts, I will share them on a final upload. But I suspect that this may very likely be our last session together. So I thank you. It has been my pleasure to share Plenty-Coup's story with you. Thanks again, and peace be with all of you.